She saved a dying stranger in an alley with nothing but vodka and a sewing needle. 3 weeks later, 200 men in black suits bowed to her in the street. But that gift, it became her prison. And when they took her son, she discovered that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is show mercy to a man who's forgotten what it means to be human. This is the story of how one desperate act of kindness started a war, and how a single mother with trembling hands taught the most feared man in the city that some debts can only be repaid by letting go. Stay with me, because what happens next will break your heart and put it back together in ways you never expected. Welcome to the Fortune Files channel. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and share your thoughts on the story, as well as where you are watching from. Let me tell you a story about a woman named Sarah. She lived in the heart of Detroit, in a small apartment that had seen better days. The kind of place where the walls were thin enough to hear your neighbor's television, and the streetlights flickered like they were trying to tell you something. Sarah was a nurse, but not just any nurse. She'd been a combat medic in Afghanistan, and those years had left marks on her soul that no amount of time could erase. Every night after her hospital shift, she'd scrub her hands until they hurt, trying to wash away the smell of blood that seemed to live in her memory more than on her skin. She had a son. His name was Tommy, and he was 8 years old. That boy was her whole world. When the nightmares came, when the sounds of the city made her think she was back in that desert, back in that place where young soldiers died in her arms, Tommy's breathing would steady her. Just watching him sleep, curled up with his stuffed bear, reminded her why she kept going. It was 2 a.m. when Sarah's life changed forever. She was walking home through an alley, a shortcut she knew she shouldn't take, but did anyway because exhaustion makes us all a little reckless. That's when she heard it, a sound she knew too well, the wet, rattling breath of someone dying. There, slumped against a dumpster, was a man in an expensive suit soaked through with blood. He'd been shot, maybe twice, and he was fading fast. Sarah's body went rigid. Her heart started racing. The smell of blood hit her, and suddenly she wasn't in Detroit anymore. She was back in the sand, back with that young soldier who died while she tried desperately to save him. Her hands started shaking. Her vision blurred. This is what they call a trigger, and for Sarah, it was like being dragged back through time to the worst moment of her life. But then she thought of Tommy. She thought of the person she wanted to be for him, and something inside her shifted. She dropped to her knees beside the stranger and checked his pulse. It was there barely. She could see the wounds, a collapsed lung, torn shoulder. Without help, he'd be dead in minutes. She couldn't call the police. Not in this neighborhood. That never ended well. So she made a choice that would change everything. Sarah dragged that man, inch by painful inch, back to her apartment. He was heavy, and the blood left a trail behind them like a dark river. She locked the door, laid him on her floor, and went to work. With nothing but vodka to sterilize, a sewing needle, and duct tape, she performed surgery on her kitchen floor. Her hands remembered what her mind tried to forget. The angles, the pressure points, the way to seal a chest wound with plastic, and tape when you've got nothing else. She worked for an hour, maybe more, stitching him back together while dawn broke through her windows. When she finally tied off the last stitch, the man was breathing. Shallow but steady. He opened his eyes for just a moment, looked at her with something like disbelief, then passed out again. Sarah sat back against her cabinets, her hands covered in blood, and realized what she'd done. She'd just saved the life of a man who looked like he belonged to a world she wanted nothing to do with. A world of violence and power and secrets. She had no idea that the man on her floor was Victor Kane, the most feared crime boss in Detroit. They called him the Ghost because he was rarely seen, only felt. He'd built an empire on old rules. No drugs near schools, no innocent blood, no unnecessary war. But those rules had made him a target. His own right-hand man, a cold, calculating enforcer named Daniel, had betrayed him, set up a fake peace meeting, and put bullets in him, leaving him to die in that alley like garbage. Daniel wanted the empire for himself, and Victor's mercy, his codes, his humanity, those were weaknesses that needed to be eliminated. But Victor didn't die, because a nurse with shaking hands and a heart too stubborn to give up had found him in the dark. When the sun came up that morning, Sarah looked out her window and froze. The entire street was lined with men in dark suits. Dozens of them, standing silent and still like soldiers at attention. At their center stood an older man with silver hair and a carved wooden cane. He looked up at her window and nodded once. Then came the knock on her door. The silver-haired man introduced himself as Victor's advisor. He told her that she'd saved the life of someone very important, that in their world, a life debt was sacred, that she would be protected, provided for, cared for forever. Then all those men outside bowed. A perfect 90-degree bow, all at once, the sound of rain on their umbrellas filling the silence. Tommy tugged her hand. "Mama, are they saying thank you?" Sarah couldn't answer, because she understood what was really happening. This wasn't gratitude. This was ownership. She'd stepped into a world that didn't let you leave. The changes started small. The refrigerator that had been broken for months was replaced overnight with a brand new one that hummed quietly and actually kept food cold. Groceries started appearing at her door. Expensive things she'd never bought, fresh vegetables, real butter, cuts of meat she couldn't pronounce. When Sarah went to pay her rent, her landlord just shook his head. "Your account's been handled. Permanently." At first, it felt like a miracle. Like the universe had finally decided to give her a break. She could breathe without counting every dollar. Tommy could have new shoes that actually fit. The constant weight of survival lifted just a little bit. But then she noticed the car across the street. A black sedan that never left. Two men inside who never seemed to sleep, never seemed to blink. They didn't approach her. Didn't speak. Just watched. Every time she opened her curtains, they were there. When she walked Tommy to school, a different car followed at a distance. When she went to work, silent men in suits would be in the hospital lobby, reading newspapers they never turned the page on. Tommy started drawing pictures at school. Stick figures of himself, his mom, and the two men who never left. "They don't blink, Mama," he told her one night. Sarah felt the walls closing in. The gifts, the protection, the money, it was all a chain, beautiful and golden, but a chain nonetheless. She couldn't complain because who complains about being safe and fed? But she couldn't breathe because she was being watched every second of every day. Then came the warning. One morning, Sarah found an envelope under her door. Inside was a photograph of Tommy at school, taken from somewhere he shouldn't have been photographed from. No note, no explanation, just that picture. Her blood went cold. This wasn't Victor's people. Victor was still recovering. This was someone else. Someone sending a message. Sarah locked every window, checked every door 3 times, slept with a kitchen knife under her pillow. By the 3rd sleepless night, she couldn't take it anymore. She called the number on the card Victor's advisor had left. "I need to see him," she said. Now. 20 minutes later, a car arrived. No words, just an open door. They drove through Detroit as the lights thinned out, all the way to the edge of the river where an old diner sat like a forgotten memory. Inside, Victor Kane sat alone in a booth, nursing black coffee with one hand still bandaged. He looked smaller than she'd imagined, more human in the dim light. "Mrs. Bennett," he said without surprise. "You shouldn't have called." Sarah slid into the seat across from him, shaking with an anger she'd been holding back for days. "You've turned my life into a prison. My son is being watched. I don't want your money. I don't want your protection. I want you gone." He stirred his coffee slowly, then looked up. His eyes were tired. "You think you can just walk away? I didn't ask for this. The moment you saved my life," he said quietly, "you entered a world that doesn't forgive neutrality. I didn't choose your world. Then you shouldn't have saved a man from it." The words landed like a slap. Sarah felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Victor leaned back, studying her. "Tell me something, Sarah. Where did you learn to keep a man alive with nothing but vodka and a sewing needle?" "Army combat medic. Afghanistan." "And what made you stop?" Her throat tightened. "I couldn't save the last one. A kid barely 18. I watched him die in my hands." Her voice cracked. "That's what happens when you hesitate." Something shifted in Victor's expression. Not pity. Understanding. "So when you saw me dying in that alley, you weren't saving me. You were saving him." Sarah looked away. "Maybe." Victor nodded slowly. "In my line of work, we call that penance." They sat in silence for a long moment, 2 broken people who'd found each other in the dark. "The photograph," Sarah said. "That wasn't your people." "No," Victor admitted. "That was Daniel, the man who tried to kill me. He's making a move, and you've become a symbol. The woman who saved the ghost. He wants to erase that story. Then let me go. Take your men, your money, everything. Let me disappear." Victor shook his head. "It's too late for that. Daniel won't stop. If I pull my protection now, you and Tommy won't last a week." He paused. "But there is another way." What way? We end this. Together. Sarah laughed bitterly. I'm a nurse, not a soldier anymore. You're more than you think, Victor said. And I need someone who understands what it means to save a life. Because what's coming, it's not about taking them. It's about choosing not to. Outside, the river moved silently past the diner, carrying secrets downstream. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. Sarah was folding laundry when she heard the crash outside. Metal screaming against metal, the sound of impact that makes your stomach drop. Then came the screaming. Help! My child! Please, somebody help! Sarah ran to the window. 2 cars, smoke rising, one of them already catching fire. Her body moved before her brain could catch up. This was the reflex they'd trained into her in the military. Someone's hurt. Go help. She ran for the door. One of Victor's guards blocked her path. Ma'am, please stay inside. That's an order. Someone's hurt out there. No, ma'am. It's not what it looks like. But then she heard it. A child's scream, sharp and terrified. And it sounded like Tommy. Every instinct in her body overrode everything else. She shoved past the guard and ran into the street. The smoke burned her lungs. She reached for the car door. That's when the van came screeching around the corner. Men in masks grabbed her. Another one grabbed Tommy from the sidewalk where he'd been drawing with chalk. Mom, he screamed. Sarah fought. She kicked, bit, scratched, but a blow to the side of her head dropped the world into darkness. When she woke up, her head was pounding. Her wrists were tied to a chair with rough rope that cut into her skin. She blinked, trying to focus, and her heart seized. Tommy was across the room, tied to a support beam, terrified but unharmed. They were in a warehouse. The same warehouse, she'd later learn, where Victor had been betrayed and shot. The air smelled like oil and old rain. A man stepped from the shadows. He was younger than Victor, maybe 40, with sharp features and eyes that never seemed to blink. He wore an expensive suit like it was armor. Mrs. Bennett, he said smoothly, I have to hand it to you. You've become quite the legend in our circles. The woman who saved the ghost. If you touch him, Sarah started, but Daniel raised a hand. Relax. The boy's safe. For now. He crouched in front of her. You see, Victor thinks mercy is strength. I think it's a disease. And you. He touched the edge of her bruised temple. You're the infection. Sarah spat blood at his feet. Daniel smiled. Ah, there's the soldier. Shame Victor will never see her die. Word traveled fast through the criminal underworld. Within an hour, cars began appearing from every corner of Detroit. Men who owed Victor favors. Men who remembered when the streets were safer under his rules. Men who'd heard what Daniel had done and didn't like the new order he represented. Victor arrived without fanfare. His shoulder was still healing, hidden under a dark coat. His silver-haired advisor walked beside him, face grave. Daniel wants a spectacle, the advisor warned. Victor's jaw set. He'll get an ending. They surrounded the warehouse like a net drawing closed. No shouting, no bravado. Just the quiet efficiency of men who'd done this before. Victor pushed open the warehouse door and stepped inside. The warehouse was a cathedral of rust and shadows. Bare bulbs swung slightly, throwing hard light across the concrete floor. Sarah sat tied to that chair in the center, wrists bleeding from the rope, temple bruised. Tommy was 12 feet away, knees pulled to his chest, eyes red from crying. When Sarah saw Victor walk in, something released in her chest, a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Daniel stepped from the shadows, casual and calm. He held a gun like it was an extension of his hand. Welcome back to church, he said. I kept your seat warm. Victor's men lined the catwalks above. Everyone was armed. No one fired. Not yet. You all right? Victor asked Sarah. She nodded once, not trusting her voice. Victor's eyes found Tommy. The boy and the crime boss looked at each other, and something passed between them. An understanding, maybe. A promise. Daniel caught the look and smiled. There it is. The disease I was telling you about. He raised his gun toward Tommy. Affection. Guns lifted all around the room. Safeties clicked off like a wave. Don't, Victor said. Not a shout. An order. Daniel tilted his head. I'll offer you a trade, Victor. Your crown for your myth. You die like a man, and the boy walks. Or we test your new religion. The silence stretched like wire pulled too tight. Then Sarah spoke. Her voice cut through the tension, calm and clear. Daniel. He looked at her, almost amused. Yes, nurse. You wanted to be seen. Well, here's your mirror. His smile flickered. I'm not the one on trial here. You made yourself the judge when you put a gun to a child, Sarah said. She leaned forward despite the rope cutting into her skin. But you're not angry at him or at me. You're angry at being replaced. By whom? Daniel laughed. Him. He jerked the gun toward Victor. Or you. A stranger who walked into his legend and made him soft. Sarah didn't blink. By time. The word traced a cold line through the space. You served a man who was never going to give you what you wanted, Sarah continued, her voice softer now, almost gentle. You cut away everything you thought was weak. But the problem isn't surgical. It's grief. Daniel's jaw tightened. Be very careful. He taught you discipline, Sarah said. But he didn't teach you what to do when love shows up, disguised as weakness. She nodded toward Tommy. You see a flaw in the system. I see a man choosing not to turn a child into another casualty. The warehouse held its breath. Daniel's grip on the gun tightened. You don't know what he made me do. I know what you wanted him to do, Sarah said. Anoint you. Make you the heir. Make everything smaller until you fit. She paused. He couldn't. Not because you're not capable. Because there's no room for anything when fear is calling the shots. She looked at his hands. How long have they been shaking? They're steady, he snapped. Then look. He did, out of reflex. The barrel trembled. Just a millimeter, but in that moment, with 20 pairs of eyes watching, it might as well have been an earthquake. For just a heartbeat, the mask slipped. Underneath was a younger man, tired and lost, abandoned by something he could never name. Then the mask clicked back. Enough. Daniel strode to Tommy, grabbed the boy by his shirt, hauled him up. Choose, Victor. God or king. Victor's men tensed. Guns rose. Victor stepped forward, hands open, gun lowered. Let the boy go. He's not part of this. Daniel pressed the barrel to Tommy's head. Make me. Time narrowed to a single point. Sarah kept talking, her voice low and steady. Daniel, you already won. You made him come here. You got him to admit what scares him. But if you pull that trigger, you'll never be more than the man who shot a child. And that's all anyone will remember. Daniel's eyes flickered to her, then back to Victor. Victor moved. Not a lunge. Just a step, deliberate and sure, placing his body between the gun and the boy. The shot cracked like thunder. Victor took the bullet in his already wounded shoulder. He spun, went to one knee, and folded Tommy into his coat in one motion, sheltering the boy like you'd shelter a candle in the wind. The warehouse erupted. Men surged forward. Daniel fired twice more, bullets sparking off metal. Hold fire. The silver-haired advisor's voice cut through the chaos. Hold fire. The madness contracted back into order. Within seconds, 3 men had Daniel face down, wrists zip-tied, guns scattered across the concrete. Tommy was crying silently, shaking in Victor's arms. Sarah tore free of her ropes with help from a guard and rushed to them. Pressure, she said, hands already working on Victor's wound. Breathe. Look at me. Victor did. In his eyes was a strange calm. The look of a man who'd finally matched his actions to his soul. You okay? He asked Tommy. The boy nodded against his chest. Victor smiled with just his eyes. Good man. They dragged Daniel upright. The room formed a circle without anyone giving orders. The oldest shape for justice. The advisor placed a gun in Victor's good hand. Daniel lifted his chin, pride and terror fighting across his face. Do it, or they'll never fear you again. The rain outside ticked against the metal roof like 1,000 dying seconds. Victor looked at Sarah. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't commanding. She was just watching him choose what kind of story this would be. Victor turned to Daniel. You wanted my throne. Here's the truth. There is no throne. It's just a chair in a room full of ghosts. He lowered the gun. No, Daniel whispered. No. Victor nodded to his men. Cut him loose. Shock rippled through the room. Victor stepped close enough that only Daniel could hear. You don't die tonight. You live with what you did. Leave this city. If I ever see you again, there won't be mercy a second time. Daniel searched Victor's face for cruelty and found only the thing he'd feared most. Humanity. It made him smaller than any bullet could have. They shoved him toward the door. He stumbled into the rain like a man released from a sentence he didn't understand. Victor let out a breath that had been trapped in his chest for years. Weeks passed. Detroit pretended not to remember. The cars disappeared from Sarah's street. Neighbors started making eye contact again. The refrigerator hummed like a normal appliance. On a foggy morning, a single car pulled up. No entourage. No army of suits. Victor climbed the stairs slower than before. He wore his coat buttoned, bandages hidden, but gravity felt different on him now. He knocked once. Sarah opened the door. The apartment smelled like coffee and toast. Tommy's backpack waited by the couch. It looked like any ordinary life. Victor stepped inside and placed an envelope on the table. A set of keys sat on top, silent and heavy with meaning. "What is this?" Sarah asked. "A house. Outside Portland, Oregon. Papers for new names. Bank accounts you don't have to be afraid of." He paused. "No strings." Sarah studied him. "Is there such a thing?" "There is if you cut them yourself." He looked at Tommy, who was watching from the couch. "You like trees, son?" Tommy nodded. "Do they have rivers?" "The kind you can hear before you see them." Sarah touched the keys. They were warm, as if someone had been holding them for a long time, waiting to let go. "If I take this," she said, "am I free?" Victor's eyes softened in a way that didn't belong to crime bosses. Or maybe it belonged to the best kind. "That night you saved my life in the alley. You gave me time. But in that warehouse, you saved something more important. You reminded me what I was supposed to be." Silence held between them, full of everything that couldn't be said. Sarah closed her hand around the keys. She didn't trust tears, so she moved instead. Started packing the last box while Tommy tied his shoes in a careful double knot. They left nothing behind that could claim them later. On the sidewalk, the city hummed with its usual rhythm. A bus sighing at the corner, steam rising from a grate, pigeons fighting over crumbs. Detroit didn't bow. It didn't bless. It just continued. Victor stood by the curb, hands in his coat pockets. He looked like a man who'd made peace with a kind of loss that gives more than it takes. Sarah opened the car door, then turned back. "Will you be all right?" He smiled, small and genuine. "I have different work to do now. Better work." Tommy waved from the car window. Victor waved back, a small, almost shy motion that didn't fit his legend, and therefore suited him perfectly. Sarah started the engine. In the rearview mirror, Victor became a figure in the fog, then a shape in the distance, then just a memory at the end of a street. She drove away. 3 weeks later, they stood on the porch of a house with peeling paint and a view of pine trees that stretched forever. Tommy ran the perimeter with a stick, mapping out the edges of his new world. Sarah carried a box into a kitchen that smelled like cedar and second chances. On the counter, she set down an old credit card, cracked and burned at one edge. The one she'd sterilized with flame that desperate night. She didn't need it anymore. But she kept it anyway. Outside, the river they'd been promised spoke in a voice you felt more than heard. Sarah stepped onto the porch and let the air move through her in a way she hadn't allowed in years. Behind her, a radio played softly. News, weather, someone selling tires. Ordinary, beautiful things. Far away in Detroit, a man walked through rooms he hadn't entered in years. He stopped at a doorway he'd avoided since grief had built it. Inside waited a piano he'd found and bought back. The lid creaked open. The keys breathed dust. He didn't play. Not yet. He just touched the wood and listened to the silence like a hymn. Back on the porch in Oregon, Sarah watched Tommy balance on the fence rail, arms out, practicing flight without leaving the ground. She smiled, small and private. No bowing men. No sirens. No cages, golden or otherwise. Just a woman who'd kept someone alive long enough to change. And in doing so, changed the story she told herself about failure. She closed her eyes and let the sound of the river write the next chapter of her life. Sometimes mercy costs everything, but sometimes it saves everyone.